So we were excited to put together our power rankings for people that may have not seen or heard of power rankings. It's not just the standings from top to bottom, 1 through 16. It's typically a combination of the eye test, who they've played against, and the strength of schedule, as well as separation of victory. Right? Are teams blowing other teams out? Have they played a Power 4 opponent? Are they playing a top conference champion potentially from a Group of 5 conference, or a top conference runner-up like Oklahoma State for Arkansas? And then just looking at how they look on all sides of the ball, right? Offense, defense. Are they making mistakes? We saw Alabama had a lot of penalties in the game, and I think last year they averaged about 8 penalties a game. But nonetheless, it's a combination of a few different factors that we put together. And what makes these things fun is that they're always ever changing. And what makes it even more fun is that if you look at the top 25, there's 9 SEC teams once again. And in terms of the top 7, 6 of them are SEC schools. So when they say it just means more, it clearly means a lot.
Yep. Yeah, no, the top of the SEC is strong. And even some of those that trickle in later, like I would still put against the top in the ACC, the top in the Big 10, top in the Big 12. So it is deep. It is deep. And, win or lose the games, there's some strong teams in the SEC that, I almost wish that they got to play more out of conference games. Like I wish I got to see Texas play, Ohio State or something during the regular season too, after that performance. But looking forward to hearing your power rankings.
Likewise. And I agree with you, right? I wish the season can only be so long, but I would love to see more of these out of conference matchups. If they could seed it where it's the one team from last year plays the one team from this season, that would be great. But we got to see what we got to see, and it was kicked off with a top 10 matchup with Texas and Michigan. And although it didn't look like that in terms of the game on the field and the scoreboard, it was top 10. Michigan's supposed to be the second or third biggest dog in the Big Ten, and they won the national championship last year, but Texas took it to them. So that kind of led to this debate for some people where does Texas deserve the number 1 spot? If you look at our power rankings, specifically yours, Hunter, man, talk to me about how you did yours and what you were thinking across it.
Yeah, so I kind of laid mine out in a tier list. It's kind of tough for me to pick, between a couple teams. So I tiered them based on where I think of them as a team through 2 weeks. And like you mentioned, this is ever changing, but more so based on the eye test and how they look. And really, if I was another team, how I would want to play them. So you have your tier 1s, and those are the playoff bound teams, right? The usual suspects right now after 3 weeks. And Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee are in here for really one reason, is that they put up pretty stellar performances against a Power 4 opponent. Georgia with Clemson, Texas with Michigan, and Tennessee versus NC State this past weekend. So not much more to say on those guys. We know what they can do. I think all of them have a great shot at the playoffs this year. Tier 2, we still need to see something from them. They needed to do a Power 4 matchup. We're going to see that from a lot of these teams, coming up. Ole Miss is a little bit further, but Alabama with Wisconsin, Missouri, has BC next week. Once we see what they can do against better competition, we'll have a better feel for, do they belong up a tier? Do they belong down a tier? Or are they just right?
So let me pause you here real quick. So I think you mentioned Alabama has Wisconsin, and Missouri has BC next week. Say both those teams win. What do you think it would take to add them to that top 3 tier, or do they just make the move and be the 4th or 5th team in that tier?
Yeah, that's a good point, or a good question there. I think from Alabama, what I need to see is a little bit more consistency, right? Like consistency on the offense. And then when they're playing Wisconsin, we need to see a good defensive performance. So they're going to have Georgia right after that too, after the bye week. So if they can put on a convincing performance, we saw from Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee, not a win, we saw a convincing performance.
Yep.
So for them to be able to jump that, I need to see something convincing. Missouri against BC, I think that is a little bit less convincing than what some of these teams have coming up.
Yeah.
Alabama versus Georgia would be the big one for them to be able to jump a couple teams there.
Yeah, and that's what's great about the schedule this year, especially with no divisions. We get to see Alabama versus Georgia. When we look at my power rankings and as we kind of talk through this, a lot of these teams that are in that tier 3 or tier 2 play tier 1 schools, right? And so Alabama plays Tennessee, so they have an opportunity to leapfrog them. Alabama has games in between that third Saturday in October to show more game control, to show more consistency on offense, to get back to tier one and the tier that we've come to know them to be in.
Yeah, definitely. I just need to see it from them on the field under new coaching. Like it's, almost guilty until proven innocent at that point. But yeah, the rest as the rest of these teams follow in, we have Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Arkansas. I have them here listed as high ceiling tier 3 teams. They have the tools to be a good team. I never thought I would put Vanderbilt here, but the way that offense can fire, they can confuse a lot of teams on the field. They're tough to deal with without the proper athleticism. Arkansas could have been up one. They really could have, but they shot themselves in the foot, and we'll dig into that more later. But these teams have high ceilings. They have a high caliber of players on both sides of the ball. Tier 4, the question here is, can they put it all together? It's similar to, the Oklahoma and Arkansas, where they didn't put the best performance, well-rounded performance, but there's more glaring holes there. With LSU, it was finishing in the red zone. With Auburn, it was consistency in offense against Cal. We saw the turnover mistakes.
Yeah.
With South Carolina, I think there's an offensive question. Against Kentucky, they were set up for success because they were on the field constantly. Kentucky couldn't stay on the field, so South Carolina had more and more opportunities with positive field position to make things happen. So can they put it all together? I think that these are kind of the division in the conference, right? The teams 4 and up can compete. The ones below, I think, are going to have a tougher road, and we can dig into those more too.
And I like your tier 4 a lot because all 3 teams have played a power 4 opponent, right? Yeah. When I'm thinking about the top 2 criteria when it comes to power rankings, it's got to be who they're playing against, who those teams have played against, how they've looked in their games. And obviously USC looked impressive against Utah State. Their defense looked impressive against LSU. Their offense looked impressive. And LSU was, for all intents and purposes, kind of controlling that game, right? You look at Auburn. We have to respect the offensive weapons there. It was not a great performance. We can dig into that later. It was an abysmal performance, to be honest. But we look at South Carolina. You see the defense is there. You see what Dylan Stewart can do. And you saw they're the first ones to take that at bat against an SEC school. So I like this tier 4. I do agree with you. They do all have an opportunity to kind of make that leap. And what's also fun is that LSU and South Carolina play this Saturday.
Yeah.
And, College game day will be there. So we don't have to, it's not going to be all hypotheticals because it's going to play out in real life.
Yeah. And a lot of these teams, it's the SEC, they're all going to be mix and matching. We're going to get to see a lot of these matchups play out and not just theoretical, like you said. The next 4, the last 4 here, rounding it out, could really go differently. Mississippi State and Texas A&M, I have them long road ahead. I don't know if that's fully accurate. The schedules for these two give them a lot of opportunities for a win. More so, they have a lot of things to build upon to be at that point where we feel comfortable saying that they have a good offense or they have a good, well-rounded defense. I think A&M, we can say that for the defense. Mississippi State, we saw the fight at the end of the Arizona State game to try to get back in it. They have those pieces, but there's still a long road ahead from a comfortability standpoint, from a leadership standpoint there at those teams to say that they could do it early.
Right.
I don't think that they're fully struggling. Yeah.
No, and I agree, right? Arizona State slashed up Mississippi State those first 3 quarters. I think they had over like 200, 250 yards. If you subscribed or listened to the last video, Arizona State fans, you could have it. They cooked, but you got to I'm sure if you had your money on the spread, you're a little bit worried there at the end. This Mississippi State was, fighting back, and that's the fight that we didn't see last year with Zach Arnett, right? We saw it with Mike Leach, but you put the defense together. The offense got hot at kind of the wrong time, or at the right time, but not with enough time. And so I agree. And with A&M, it's you played McNeese State, you understand what type of game that is, but there is this. You get credit for hanging around with Notre Dame. That win, that loss might not carry as much weight going forward, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are really good points. And, we can see a lot more from these teams in the future. Like there's an opportunity for these teams to improve. There's an opportunity for every team to improve. They have the leadership from the coaching standpoint to be able to do it. It's just putting that into the players on the field. The last tier, I know there's some recency bias here for Kentucky because I came into the season thinking Kentucky was going to be solid, but they looked rough, very rough. One of the worst offensive performances I can recall recently, 3 for 30 are 3 for 10 for 30 yards. Like that's not good from a quarterback that you were expecting to be able to lead this team that has a strong defense. So putting them down, they're going to need to show me something drastically different with their O-line before I can put them any higher. Florida,
Yeah.
week 1 was rough. They played, Samford. DJ Lagway could elevate this team. I think if they ever elevated out of this tier, it would be behind him over Graham Mertz. Next week, they have a lot of questions around that. Who do you start? DJ Lagway looked great. So do you put him in instead of Mertz for, their upcoming game?
Absolutely. And I was listening to Andy Staples today, actually, and he's a Florida alum. He had walked on at one point, and he was like, hey, you got to run with Lagway, right? Like, big time columnist. You know what you're going to get with Mertz. And with Lagway, he led the SEC last week with yards. So again, it's Samford, but first game out the gate at the Division I level, he brings some excitement. I think he went like 24 for 29. I mean, like, you might as well. So that's your power rankings, huh? So
that's it. Let's flip over to yours. I know there's a couple differences. We have the same usual suspects up top, but break it down for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I had Georgia at 1. I feel like Clemson is a better opponent compared to Michigan, so I had to give them a nod in terms of over Texas. I think Texas's game control has been very impressive. I'm really excited for that game in October that's taking place in Austin. I put Ole Miss at 3. The Ole Miss's receiver Trey Harris leads the SEC in yards. Jackson Dart has been very impressive. I think he's at about like 8 or 9 touchdowns. He had 6 in week 1. The knock for them is going to be their schedule, right? You played Furman week 1. You played Middle Tennessee State week 2. You play Wake Forest this week, who is all intents purposes lower SEC. I think they're lower ACC. They're 1-1. But I'm impressed with their game control. I'm impressed with what they bring back, and I feel like I'm more familiar with what Jackson Dart can do over a whole season compared to what Nico can do in 2 games. Nico being the quarterback for Tennessee, I have them at 4. That team outscored NC State, who's supposed to be a ranked team, 41-14 over 3 quarters between the second and the fourth quarter, right? Just absolute domination. There was some questions in terms of protecting the ball. Nico did throw an interception, but that defense is extremely stout. Dylan Sampson is the best running back in the SEC until I see otherwise. Trevor Etienne, you have time to potentially reclaim your throne, but Dylan Sampson leads the SEC in yards. So that would be my 1 through 4. I would say if I had to tier them, I think 1 through 5, which includes Bama, are playoff bound. And that would match with what I had in my original playoff projections. We can pull it up if it makes sense. But Bama, they are kind of at the mercy of their expectations. They're at the mercy of what Saban has put out there. And we understand it's not the Saban era, but, pardoning a field goal in the fourth quarter, they were only up 1 point on USF at home. Western Kentucky, the knock was just expecting to see more on offense, but in that USF game, and USF is a respectable opponent, but there are many people on USF who would not get offers to Alabama, right? But I need to see more from them consistently throughout the game to kind of be in that 1 through 4. They have the opportunity to play Georgia, to play Texas, or to play Georgia, to play Tennessee, to get those spots back in upcoming weeks. But, I'm not even knocking Jalen Milroe in terms of the fumble. That was clearly a snap issue. But, what I am unimpressed by and what I'd like to see more from is just consistency on the offense to put them in that tier of 1 through 4 who have been dominating. Any thoughts thus far from what you've seen or what you heard?
No, yeah, I think you're pretty spot on. We only have the difference there with Ole Miss and Tennessee. You mentioned the best running back in the SEC. Some people think Jalen Milroe is the best running back in the SEC. No, I got jokes. No, I think it's spot on. I think maybe some of the questions are around a little bit after this, but I like where you have everybody so far.
This is where it gets fun, right? There's some teams, like we said, have played Power 4 opponents. Some teams that have had, we'll say, quote unquote, quality losses. Missouri is that team that is. This should be fresh and reset just from this season. There is the carryover from last season, similar to Ole Miss, because you return Brady Cook, you return Luther Burden, you return Theo Weiss at receiver, and you haven't given up a point all season. Buffalo is obviously a mid-tier MAC opponent, and they played Murray State week 1, but just absolute game control. Very impressed from what I'm seeing in the air. LSU gets the spot at 7. They're 2-0. And not every record is coinciding. 1-1. They're 1-1. You're right. Not every record is necessarily coinciding with the standings, but hear me out. I believe that Garrett Nussmeier is a more consistent quarterback than some of the quarterback play that I see underneath thus far in 2 games. It's Nicholls State and it's USC, but we saw an improved USC defense. Garrett Nussmeier kept them in the game and did not lose in the game. So I'm very impressed with him. The challenges are going to come at the running back position, losing your starting running back the previous week. And number 8 is a team I'm really excited about, of course, is Arkansas. Woo Pig Sioux Nation, loved the pick last week, but Taylor Green is top 10 in a good amount of quarterback stats, including, passer rating in the SEC as well as yards. But more importantly, this team was able to go toe-to-toe with the Big 12 runner-ups last week on the road. They had a 2-score lead early on, right? An interception completely changed the dynamic of that game that Oklahoma State was able to take back. So I have them at 8. I think they could definitely give a game with LSU, which is a game for a trophy. It's a huge rivalry game. They could give Missouri a game, and they could give Alabama a game. I honestly do believe that. The 9 through 16, it's kind of a hodgepodge, right? If you look, South Carolina's played Kentucky. So like you said, Hunter, I think we're kind of the expectations of Kentucky and the expectations of South Carolina have probably played a role in me putting Kentucky at 14 and South Carolina at 12 because I thought very highly of Kentucky. I was more not as expecting as much from South Carolina. And when you take those two expectations together and you just see domination from a new starting quarterback compared to a starting quarterback coming from Georgia, starting quarterback that has an all AAC wide receiver in Jamori Macklin, SEC top receiver in Barry and Brown, and Dane Key, who's also really impressive. I expect more, and we understand the O-line is a challenge, but that was the only gap that showed up to me that game that I wasn't expecting. The defense is supposed to be solid, but when you're on the field that much, it's tough. So, I put South Carolina at 12. Some people might not agree with A&M at 11. Obviously, they're 1-1. The team they lost to just lost to Northern Illinois. So I'm open to scrutiny there. But when I look at A&M, I'm looking at the talent they have. I'm looking at the game control that I saw, and they kept it close with Notre Dame. They were in it for the majority of the game, and then of course took care of business. And then at the 10 spot, I have Oklahoma, and I have them behind Vanderbilt, despite being 2-0, because I went to University of Houston, right? And Houston played UNLV week 1. They got absolutely dominated. The score was 27-7, but they scored in garbage time in the fourth quarter with their backup quarterback, their third string quarterback, mind you, against UNLV. UNLV was able to score 27 points on Houston, and Oklahoma was able to score 16. 14 if you don't count the safety. 14 points is not going to win you games in the SEC. Every team that I have above Oklahoma, I think could give them a game if they're only gonna focus mostly on defense. And I look, week 1, I was hot on Deion Burks. I was very hot on Jackson Arnold. I no doubt in my mind they could get back up to that level. They play a lot of these schools. I think they play Georgia this year. They're going to play Texas this year, obviously. And they're going to play Tennessee in 2 weeks. So they have the opportunity to show us what they have, but I respect their out-of-conference schedule with Temple, Houston, and Tulane. You saw Tulane gave Kansas State a game this past week if you watched other conferences, but I don't know if it's enough to put them over Vanderbilt, who's 2-0 and who has played a top ACC contender and won, took care of business, finished the game. What I would have liked to see from a Arkansas, from an overtime win. And so that kind of rounds out my 1 through 12 so yeah.
Yeah. I think that was my one question, and you expanded on it well with Oklahoma there. I would think that they would maybe a little bit higher just from the defensive side of the ball, that they do have such a stout defense. But again, they are playing, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri. Like, they're playing a lot of these teams. So,
they're playing high-powered offenses. Those, like, it's not like, and not that Bama's ever really had a bad offense. I mean, you go through, AJ McCarron and Mac Jones and Tua, and Georgia's had offensive. They might not have been as strong offensively prior to Stetson Bennett, and Aaron Murray was good, but like all these teams have good offenses. We're not in a this is a defense only. All these teams have good offenses. So that's where I need to see more from Oklahoma if your two opponents are Temple and Houston to this point. They make these stops against Tennessee. If they slow down Nico in 2 weeks, they'll probably be top 8. You beat Nico in 2 weeks, you'll probably be top 8 at worst, right?
Yeah.
And because you saw Tennessee made a jump 7 spots to the top 10 in the rankings, AP. So the opportunity is there. I just need to see it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear where you're coming from. Now, I mean, 14, 15, 16 are kind of the ones that we both know they're at the bottom, but I think, Auburn at 13 after that loss, that's a big drop from where I think we were looking at them in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and for me, it is a big drop. And Cal may be better than we anticipated. Going off of their performance the first week against UC Davis, 31-13. Not really super impressed with Fernando at quarterback there, but when you turn the ball over 5 times, and you give up an interception for a touchdown, it leads me to be concerned about what you're going to do against SEC defenses. I think out of 13 through 16, Auburn probably has the most potential to excel on the offensive level. Like Cam Coleman's great. And I always forget his name, but Keandre Lambert, senior receiver, he's incredible, right? He's had 2 touchdowns over the last couple games. But I got to see it put all together. The defense held their own. They slowed down Jaden Knott. I think you had mentioned it. We had talked about it. I think he had like 11 carries for 10 yards. The running game was less than 100 yards for Cal, but I just need to see more to give them the nod over South Carolina just based upon the 2 games. You could argue that they should be higher than A&M. I would give you that. You could argue that. I can't put them over Vanderbilt, and I can't put them over OU with both 2-0 at this time with respectable power, a power 4 win. Like respectable, not they have a power. Both those teams have a power 4 win. So that's why I have Auburn there. That's no shade to Auburn. If it feels like it, put some sunglasses on. But
yeah,
I don't know what to tell you.
Anything on Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Florida? Like any reason one is higher than the other here?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no numerical number that you have to have for your tier list, right? If I could put 4 people in tier 1 or 3 teams in tier 2, I would put Kentucky in the can they put it all together? It would be fringe, but I think they have the pieces to compete. Like I still believe in this defense. I know they have the weapons on the outside. It could just take some time to get Brock Vandagriff warmed up and ready. I have a hard time believing that he cannot be the guy. And I'm okay and willing to be proven wrong, but he had a great performance the week before with 2 touchdowns, and you saw a lot on the ground. I think I would just need to see more from Kentucky on the offensive side, but I would put them in that can they put it all together bucket. From a high ceiling bucket, our teams are pretty similar, right? I think you had Arkansas, Vanderbilt, OU, and if you look at my 8, 9, 10, it's about the same. LSU is probably higher on my side than yours. But I'm just a believer. I'm a believer. I'm a believer in LSU, so I got them a little bit higher there. They have played the toughest test besides maybe Vanderbilt on that list between 7 and 10 when it comes to opponents.
I hear you. Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of rounds it out. I mean, we talked a little bit about Florida and Mississippi State. These rankings are ever changing. A lot of these teams are going to start to play each other, like we mentioned. So there will be a lot of opportunity for ones to jump, shift, drop in some cases, right? So we'll see, but wanted to run through that and get some thoughts there. Any last thoughts before we move on from the power rankings here?
No last thoughts here, or at least not a lot. Had a great time putting this together. I think that it's interesting to see Alabama at the 5 spot. And, I think we kind of saw them at a similar spot last year, trying to kind of prove who they were and coming off of having Bryce Young at quarterback. Missouri's. I think Missouri's going to be in a similar spot throughout the season, kind of hawking down some of these other teams because they don't have that same schedule, but they do have the benefit of playing Alabama, which could serve as a marquee win, could serve as a good close loss to kind of put them in that tier. Ole Miss just needs to play someone.
Yeah, they'll get there. They'll get there.
They don't play LSU till week 7, but those are a couple of my thoughts.
Yeah,
but so I'm overall, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I feel good where they're at. I know there's some differences, so I'm sure we'll hear some different opinions, and happy to hear anyone out on if they think their team should be higher or their rival team should be lower.
Yeah. Oh yeah.